Hi, and welcome to the Yes Tales Story Channel. How lovely to see you. My name is Jess, and in this episode I will be reading The Queen of Quok by L. Frank Baum. If you like this video, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. That would really make my day. So make sure you're warm and snug, close your eyes and clear your mind from any worries. Take a deep breath. Let's begin. Once upon a time, a king died, as kings are prone to do, seeing as they tend to have the same shortness of breath as us other mortals. It was high time this king abandoned his earthly life, for he had lived in a sadly extravagant manner, and his subjects could spare him without the slightest inconvenience. His father had left him a full treasury with an abundance of both money and jewels, but the foolish and recently deceased king had squandered every cent on his riotous living. He had then taxed his subjects until most of them became paupers, and this money vanished in more riotous living. Next he sold all the grand old furniture in the palace, all the silver and gold plate and bric-a-brac, all the rich carpets and furnishings, and even his own regal wardrobe, leaving him only a soiled and moth-eaten ermine robe to wear over his threadbare clothing. And he spent this money on further riotous living. Don't ask me to explain what riotous living is. I only know, from hearsay, that it is an excellent way to get rid of money. And that is what this spend-happy king found too. He now picked all the magnificent jewels from his royal crown and from the round ball on the top of his sceptre, sold them and spent the money. Riotous living, of course. But at last he was at the very end of his resources. He couldn't sell the crown itself, because no one but the king had the right to wear it. Neither could he sell the royal palace, because only the king had a right to live there. So finally he found himself reduced to a bare palace, containing only a big mahogany bed frame that he slept in, a small stool on which he sat to pull off his shoes, and the moth-eaten ermine robe. In this predicament, he was reduced to having to borrow the occasional dime from his chief counsellor so that he could buy a ham sandwich, and the chief counsellor didn't have many dimes, as one who counsels his king so foolishly is very likely to ruin his own prospects as well. So the king, having nothing more to live for, died suddenly, and left a 10-year-old son to inherit the dismantled kingdom, the moth-eaten robe, and the jewel-stripped crown. No one envied the child, who had hardly been thought of until he became king himself, but then he was recognised as a person of some importance, and the politicians and hangers-on, headed by the chief counsellor of the kingdom, held a meeting to determine what could be done for him. These people had helped the old king to live riotously while his money lasted, and now they were poor and too proud to work. So they tried to think of a plan that would bring more money into the little king's treasury, where it would be handy for them to help themselves. When the meeting was over, the chief counsellor came to the young king, who was playing in the courtyard, and said, "Your Majesty, We've thought of a way to restore your kingdom to its former power and magnificence. Okay, replied His Majesty carelessly. How are you going to do that? By marrying you to a lady of great wealth, replied the counsellor. Marrying me? Cried the king. But I'm only 10 years old. I know, it is sad, but your Majesty will grow older, and the affairs of the kingdom demand that you marry a wife. Can't I marry a mother instead? Asked the poor little king, who had lost his mother when he was a baby. Certainly not, declared the counsellor. To marry a mother would be illegal. To marry a wife is right and proper. Can't you marry her yourself? Inquired His Majesty, aiming his toy at the chief counsellor's toe and laughing to see how he jumped to escape it. Let me explain, said the counsellor. You haven't got a penny to your name, but you have a kingdom. There are plenty of rich women who would be happy to give their wealth in exchange for a queen's coronet, even if the king is but a child. So we've decided to advertise that the highest bidder shall become the Queen of Quok. If I must marry at all, said the king after a moment's thought, I'd prefer to marry Niana, the armourer's daughter. She's too poor, replied the counsellor. Her teeth are like pearls, her eyes are like amethysts, and her hair is like gold, declared the little king. True, your Majesty, but consider that you must be able to use your wife's wealth. How would Niana look after you've pulled her pearly teeth, plucked out her amethyst eyes, and shaved her golden hair? The boy shuddered. Have it your way, he said despairingly. Only let the lady be as dainty as possible and a good playmate. We shall do our best, replied the chief counsellor, and went to advertise throughout the neighbouring kingdoms for a wife for the boy King of Quok. There were so many applicants for the privilege of marrying the little king that the counsellor and all the hangers-on decided to put him up for auction to make sure they got the largest amount of money into the kingdom. And on the day of the auction, ladies gathered at the palace from all the surrounding kingdoms, from Bilken, Mulgravia, Junkum, and even as far as the Republic of Macveld. The chief counsellor arrived at the palace early in the morning and had the king's face washed and his hair combed. And then he padded the inside of the crown with old newspapers to make it small enough to fit His Majesty's head. It was a sorry-looking crown, with plenty of big and small holes where the jewels had once been, and it had been neglected and knocked around until it was quite battered and tarnished. Yet, as the counsellor said, it was the king's crown, and it was quite proper he should wear it on such a formal occasion as his own auction. Like all boys, be they kings or paupers, His Majesty had torn and stained his one suit of clothes so that they were hardly presentable, and there was no money to buy new ones. Therefore, the counsellor wound the old ermine robe around the king and sat him down on the stool in the middle of the otherwise empty audience chamber. Around him stood all the courtiers and politicians and hangers-on of the kingdom, consisting of people who were too proud or too lousy to work for a living. And there were a great number of them, you can be sure of that, and they certainly looked very imposing. Then the doors of the audience chamber were thrown open, and the wealthy ladies who aspired to be Queen of Quok entered. The king looked them over with much anxiety, and decided they were all old enough to be his grandmother, and ugly enough to scare away the crows from the royal cornfields, after which he lost interest in them. But the rich ladies never looked at the poor little king slouched on his stool. They gathered instead round the chief counsellor, who acted as auctioneer. "How much am I offered for the coronet of the Queen of Quok?" asked the counsellor in a loud voice. "Where is the crown?" inquired a fuzzy old lady who had just buried her 9th husband and was worth several millions. "There isn't a coronet at present," explained the chief counsellor, "but the highest bidder will have the right to wear one, and she can then buy it." "Oh," said the fuzzy old lady, "I see." Then she added, "I'll bid $14. $14,000, cried a sour-looking woman who was thin and tall and had wrinkles all over her skin. Like a frosted apple, the king thought. The bidding now became fast and furious, and the poverty-stricken courtiers brightened up as the sum began to mount into the millions. "He'll bring us a very pretty fortune after all," whispered one to his comrades, "and then we will have the pleasure of helping him spend it." The king began to feel anxious. All the women who looked somewhat kind-hearted or pleasant had stopped bidding due to a lack of money, and the slender old lady with the wrinkles seemed determined to get the coronet at any price, and with it the boy husband. This ancient creature finally became so excited that her wig got all out of place and her false teeth kept slipping out, which horrified the little king greatly, but she would not give up. At last, the chief counsellor ended the auction by announcing, "Sold to Mary Ann Brzezinski de la Porcus for $3,900,624.16. And the sour-looking woman paid the money in cash and on the spot, which proves this is a true fairy tale. The king was so distressed at the thought of marrying this hideous creature that he began to wail and weep, whereupon the woman boxed his ears loudly. But the counsellor scolded her for punishing her future husband in public, saying, "You are not married yet. Wait until tomorrow after the wedding. Then you can abuse him as much as you like. But for now, we prefer to have people think this is a love match." The poor king slept very little that night. The thought of his future wife filled him with terror. Nor could he get the idea out of his head that he preferred to marry the armourer's daughter, who was about his own age. He tossed and turned in his hard bed until the moonlight came in through the window and lay like a great white sheet upon the bare floor. Finally, in turning over for the 100th time, his hand accidentally struck a secret spring in the headboard of the big mahogany bed frame, and suddenly, with a sharp click, the panel flew open. The noise caused the king to look up, and seeing the open panel, he stood up on tiptoe, and reaching inside, he drew out a folded paper. It had several leaves fastened together like a book, and written on the first page was, "When the king is in trouble, this leaf he must double, and set it on fire to obtain his desire." This was not very good poetry, but when the king spelled it out in the moonlight, he was filled with joy. "There is no doubt that I am in trouble," he exclaimed, "so I'll burn it at once and see what happens." He tore off the leaf and put the rest of the book in its secret hiding place. Then, folding the paper double, he placed it on top of his stool, lit a match, and set fire to it. It made a horrid smudge for such a small paper, and the king sat on the edge of the bed and watched it eagerly. When the smoke cleared away, he was surprised to see a round little man sitting on the stool, with folded arms and crossed legs, calmly facing the king and smoking a black briarwood pipe. "Well, here I am," he said. So I see, replied the little king. But how did you get here? Didn't you burn the paper? The round man replied. Yes, I did, acknowledged the king. Then you must be in trouble, and I've come to help you out of it. I am the slave of the royal bedstead. Oh, said the king, I didn't know there was one. Neither did your father, or he would not have been so foolish as to sell everything he had for money. By the way, it's lucky for you that he didn't sell this bedstead. Now then, what do you want? I'm not sure what I want, replied the king, but I know what I don't want, and that's the old woman who's going to marry me. That's easy enough, said the slave of the royal bedstead. All you need to do is give her back the money she paid the chief counsellor and break off the wedding. Don't be afraid. You're the king, and your word is law. Right, said the Majesty. But I'm in great need of money. How am I going to live if the chief counsellor returns all those millions to Mary Ann Brzezinski? Whew, that's easy enough, answered the man again. And putting his hand in his pocket, he pulled out an old-fashioned leather purse and tossed it to the king. Keep that with you, he said, and you'll always be rich. For you can take out as many 25-cent silver pieces as you wish, one at a time. No matter how often you take one out, another will instantly appear in its place inside the purse. Thank you, said the king gratefully. You have done me a rare favour. Now I have the money for all my needs, and I won't be obliged to marry anyone. Thank you 1,000 times. Don't mention it, answered the man, puffing his pipe slowly and watching the smoke curl into the moonlight. These things are easy to me. Is that all you want? It's all I can think of right now, the king replied. Then please close that secret panel in the bedstead, the man said. The other leaves of the book may be of use to you some other time. The boy stood up on the bed, as before, and reaching up, closed the opening so that no one else could discover it. Then he turned to face his visitor, but the slave of the royal bedstead had disappeared. I expected that, said His Majesty. Yet I'm sorry he didn't wait to say goodbye. With a lighter heart and a sense of great relief, the boy king placed the leather purse underneath his pillow, and climbing into bed again, he slept soundly until morning. When the sun rose, His Majesty rose too, refreshed and calm, and the first thing he did was to send for the chief counsellor. That mighty person arrived looking glum and unhappy, but the boy was too full of his own good fortune to notice it. I've decided not to marry anyone, he said, for I've just come into a fortune of my own. Therefore, I command you return the money the woman paid you for the right to wear the coronet of the Queen of Quok, and make a public declaration that the wedding will not take place. Hearing this, the counsellor began to tremble, for he could see that the young king had decided to reign in earnest, and he looked so guilty that His Majesty inquired, "Well, what is the matter now?" "Sir," replied the wretch in a shaky voice, "I cannot give the woman her money, for I have lost it." "Lost it?" cried the king in mingled astonishment and anger. "Yes, your Majesty. On my way home from the auction last night, I stopped at the drugstore to get some potash lozenges for my throat, which was dry and hoarse from so much loud talking. And your Majesty will admit, it was through my efforts the woman was induced to pay such a great price. Well, going into the drugstore, I carelessly left the package of money lying on the seat of my carriage, and when I came out again it was gone, and the thief was nowhere to be seen." Did you call the police? Asked the king. Yes, I called, but they were all on the next block, and although they have promised to search for the robber, I have little hope they will ever find him. The king sighed. What shall we do now? He asked. I fear you must marry Mary Ann Brzezinski, answered the chief counsellor, unless, of course, you order the executioner to cut her head off. That would be wrong, declared the king. The woman must not be harmed. It's only fair that we return her money, for I will not marry her under any circumstances. Is that private fortune you mentioned large enough to repay her? Asked the counsellor. Why, yes, said the king thoughtfully, but it will take some time to do it, and that shall be your task. Call the woman here. The counsellor went to search for Marianne, who, when she heard that she was not to become a queen, but would receive her money back, flew into a violent rage and boxed the chief counsellor's ears so viciously that they stung for nearly an hour. But she followed him into the king's audience chamber, where she demanded her money in a loud voice, also claiming the interest due for the one night. The counsellor has lost your money, said the boy king, but he shall pay you every cent out of my own private purse. However, I'm afraid you'll have to take it in small change. That doesn't matter, she said, scowling at the counsellor as if she longed to box his ears again. I don't care how small the change is, as long as I get every cent that belongs to me, and the interest. Where is it? Here, answered the king, handing the counsellor the leather purse. It is all in silver quarters, and they must be taken from the purse one at a time, but there'll be plenty to pay your demands and to spare. As there were no chairs, the counsellor sat down on the floor in one corner and began counting out 25-cent pieces from the purse, one by one. And the old woman sat down on the floor opposite him and took each piece of the money from his hand. It was a large sum, $3,900,624.16, and it takes 4 times as many 25-cent pieces as it would dollars to make up that amount. The king left them sitting there and went to school, and often thereafter he came to the counsellor and interrupted him long enough to get what money he needed from the purse to reign in a proper and dignified manner. This somewhat delayed the counting, but as it was a long job anyway, it didn't matter much. Eventually, the king grew to manhood and married the pretty daughter of the armourer, and they now have 2 lovely children of their own. Once in a while, they go into the big audience chamber of the palace and let the little ones watch the aged grey-haired counsellor count out 25-cent silver pieces to a withered old woman who watches his every move to make sure he doesn't cheat. It's a big sum, $3,900,624.16 in 25-cent pieces. But this is how the counsellor was punished for being so careless with the woman's money. And this is how Mary Ann Brzezinski de la Porkers was also punished for wishing to marry a 10-year-old king so that she could wear the coronet of the Queen of Quok.